last week I shared that I've been thinking a lot about how we talk about mental health in the workplace and how being a mom of twins while running this podcast really opened my eyes. I shared with you that I hit a wall trying to juggle the demands of motherhood, working, keeping up with recordings, and maintaining that work-life balance that I am literally always preaching about. And between the responsibilities of being a working mom and my packed days, my focus was just super scattered. My sleep, frankly, wasn't really great, and I really just felt like I was getting by. And that experience led me to discover this concept of mental wealth, which I shared has completely shifted how I think about workplace wellness. And instead of just managing mental health reactively, mental wealth is about proactively investing in your mental resilience. Think of it as building a mental savings account that you can draw from when work gets challenging. I've been exploring different tools and the habits that support mental wealth building, and I recently discovered Magic Mind, which has been a game changer in my daily routine. Magic Mind reached out and sent me their mental performance shots and sleep elixir to try, and what caught my attention was how they align with the 5 pillars of mental wealth: sleep, diet, exercise, stress management, and exogenous compounds, basically supplemental tools that help optimize someone's mental state. So here's what's fascinating, and I know I shared this with you last week. They've created this 24-hour approach to mental performance. The daytime shot helps with focus and clarity, which I've been using for my morning podcast recordings and before I get to work. And I've noticed that I'm sharper and much more present in my interviews and with work in general. And their sleep elixir helps you wind down and get better rest, which we know is so crucial to making good decisions. And I shared with you also last week that I really only take vitamins. I'm not someone who generally relies on other kinds of supplements, but Magic Mind has really, truly made an impact on me. In fact, as I shared, I did not agree to working with them until I was really able to test its efficacy before talking to you about it. And Magic Mind is also vegan friendly. So for someone like me who keeps kosher or anyone else that has dietary restrictions, this has been super important in just finding ease in use. And I appreciate that they're not positioning this as some miracle cure. It's one piece of a larger mental wealth strategy. The formula includes time-released caffeine to avoid the afternoon crash. I should say the dreaded afternoon crash. And they've added herbs for stress reduction, which is honestly something that we could all use more of. Plus, it doesn't replace your regular caffeine routine, thankfully. So I do drink the mental performance shot alongside my morning coffee. So for my listeners who also want to invest in their mental wealth this January, Magic Mind is offering an exclusive 45% off their new bundle pack, both the focus and sleep shots together. Just go to magicmind.com/humanhrjan. That's magicmind.com/humanhrjan for 45% off your first bundle. Make 2025 the year you really invest in your mental resilience. Your team and your career will thank you for it.
Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. And actually, I'm very excited because we have a return guest. Antoni Lacinai joins me again. Woohoo! Raise the roof. Love it. And Antoni joined the podcast last April. We just looked it up before, and we had an amazing conversation. So amazing that we just had to have him back on the podcast for another year. So let me tell you or remind you, in case hopefully you listened to that last episode, but let me remind you all about Antoni and who he is. So Antoni Lacinai inspires and educates his customers on how to get super engaged teams and a green light mindset, culture, and communication. Antoni is giving keynotes around the world and has coached thousands of executives and teams who want to lead people, serve clients, and collaborate with colleagues. To date, he has written and co-written 14 books and hundreds of columns and articles. He's a regular columnist in various magazines and is often interviewed on Swedish national TV. Antoni lives in Sweden, where he loves to create illustrations for his keynotes, songs for his friends, and business blueprints for his customers. And here is a very fun fact about Antoni. In 2019, he won 3rd place in the Swedish Championship of Storytelling. Antoni, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much. And now I realize why some people call me Last Night, because it sounded like last night when you said
Oh, really? That's so
Lacinai.
funny.
So there you go.
Lacinai.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's also the accent, right? Like maybe someone Swedish doesn't exactly pronounce it in the same way.
They don't know
as
how
I
to
do.
pronounce it at all. It's a Mediterranean name, so they have no idea. It's everything from lasagna
just
to Last Night. So yeah.
Right. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, well, that's your new nickname then, Last Night.
Yeah, sure. Funny. And that's my password for everything. So you know that as well now. Everyone who listens knows
now.
it. I have a new fun fact, by the way. Within a week, I hope that I will have my first song on Spotify. Yeah, can you imagine?
Stop. Yeah. Well, by the time this episode comes out, we'll be able to link it in the show notes.
Yeah,
because this
you
is
would,
coming out
but you won't understand a word.
That's okay.
It's in Swedish.
That's okay. We can still, we can still rock out and enjoy the music. Is it a very lively song? Is it acoustic?
It's a Christmas song.
Oh, very nice. Good for you. You're singing?
Thank you. Somewhat. I'm singing a bit of it, but then I have a professional singer doing most of it. So it's a duet. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, please send it my way, and if it's something that you would like others to hear, I'm going to link it in the show notes. For sure.
we'll see if I dare to
stream Antoni's Christmas music now, wherever you listen to music. That's amazing. I love that. I actually don't know that I've ever had a guest on who has a single or a song on Spotify before. So you're the first.
Well, now you do. Yeah. At least soon you do. Yeah.
Right. That's cool. If we're talking to everyone in the future, then it's totally live and ready to be listened to. But anyway, we have a very important topic on the plate today, and it goes into a very important topic, but one that's also kind of making its rounds in the news and in different articles. And it's about social well-being and loneliness in work. And something that you and I spoke about just before we started recording is that the Harvard Business Review just published an article, I want to say this week, which is like around the last week of November, about a Gallup study around how people are still lonely at work. And this specific data point in reference here is that the 2024 State of the Global Workplace report by Gallup found that 1 in 5, or 20% of employees worldwide currently feels lonely at work. So this is really queuing us up for an important discussion. I know you do a lot of work on this. So what are your thoughts on that? 20% of people saying, yeah, I'm lonely at work.
I get saddened by it. It's really depressing numbers. I even saw higher numbers, but then perhaps there was the whole population and not only employees. But can you imagine 1 of 5 feel lonely on a daily basis? So this is not like one off or something. It's on a daily basis where they have this involuntary social isolation. So it's not their choice, which is a big difference between being alone or lonely, I guess. I'm alone quite often in my work, but I'm not lonely all that often. So that's a big difference. And I know that some of it is attributed to our remote work environment, where we might not be as good as creating a good us culture, a team spirit yet. We should be, I guess, after a few years now living in this world, but that could be one of the reasons. We should at least make sure to consider it and think about the implications. And I think that this might be the first real good argument I've heard about having people in the office. Like 5 days a week, which some people are forced to be, but at least like a couple of days per week that you actually meet people in the flesh.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And actually, I am doing you a disservice by referencing the Harvard Business Review article, considering I didn't get the chance to send it to you yet. But one of the things that they go on to say is that actually that statistic, or even the studies that they have done, is showing that there is still a bit of this issue in in-person work also, and that, to your point, in-person work does solve for a lot of the things that remote work finds challenging, like creating those organic moments to speak with someone, automatically finding a connection, right? Like when you're remote, you have to take extra effort to make that connection, whereas when you're in person, you don't have to necessarily take that extra effort. So those things remain true. But interestingly, the article was kind of talking about that in-person work isn't necessarily the thing that's going to solve it. Certainly, it's the thing that could help people to feel less lonely. But it kind of emphasized this importance on creating a programmatic approach to connection, connectedness, and really the social interaction, which I know is something that you and I spoke about previously as well.
Yeah.
And that social interaction, even if it's not, we might automatically gravitate toward like a happy hour or an event, but social interaction is also just, how is your weekend? What did you do this week? How is your pet? How are your kids? Right? Like those are also really meaningful social interactions. So I'm curious to get your perspective on how, like, let's say there is an opportunity for a global workforce to be in person or to have this office experience. How do you see social interaction playing a role in a remote workforce or in a largely remote workforce?
First of all, you did not do me a disservice at all. I'm glad that you mentioned it. And it's sometimes we just fall back to the easy solution, and this might be an easy solution, especially if you don't have trained leaders in the area of handling a distributed team, for instance, which is harder. It's absolutely possible, but it's harder, and you don't get that kind of water cooler moments. You haven't built in what you can call the accidental social interactions. But if you have a really good office layout and so on, then you meet people more frequently. The old traditional type of offices with cell office doors or even landscape where you sit in your cubicle doesn't really give all that. But if you have those more of a loungy areas, then there's possibilities for people to meet more regularly and just by accident also. And I see you and I say, oh, Traci, yeah, I come to think about this. And all of a sudden you can talk about that. But on the other hand, we've had distributed teams for decades. Obviously, it works.
Right.
And especially for some areas and some functions and so on. But it requires much more because we have seen now that the meeting frequency has gone up because all of those, accidental, we call it accidental or random meetings now have to be structured meetings, which is a different approach. So all of a sudden we are overwhelmed with even more meetings just because we want to have a one-on-one with somebody, for instance, instead of just picking up the phone. And I think that the phone call is a missing link today. We don't use the phone anymore for calling people.
Yeah, it is. There's something that's so much less labor intensive about picking up the phone and speaking to someone on the phone versus being in a meeting, potentially also on camera for 30 minutes. Like it is a little bit different, even being on the phone versus being on a meeting with your camera off. Like there is kind of a magic to being on the phone. There's something a little bit more personal about it. And I don't know, maybe someone somewhere did some sort of psychological study on why that is, but I'm certainly not the person to do that. But I also think about, like, as you say that, and this is not something that I even anticipated bringing up in our discussion today, but it just dawned on me that there are companies who have said, we are getting rid of meetings. We're not doing any meetings, like we're meeting free. I'm trying to recall some of the more popular companies that have gone meeting free. But this is one area that then I'm like, okay, well, I'm curious, like, what are they doing to be intentional about their social interactions then? How are they creating moments where people are connecting in and out of the context of work without having those moments that, to your point, become these structured meetings versus when you're passing someone in like a lunchroom and you're just picking up a conversation with them? I don't know. How do they do that?
Well, first of all, they will not succeed, obviously. It's impossible. We have to meet. In factories, we produce products. In meetings, we produce ideas, decisions, alignment, and all sorts of things. So good meetings are fantastic. We want to get rid of the bad meetings, of course, the 50% that doesn't lead anywhere. And that's another story. That's more about how do we structure our time and do we have meetings that align with our goals, and do we have time for random meetings or ad hoc meetings and so on. So they will not succeed not having any meeting at all. They might just call it something else.
Right.
Now we're going to have a powwow. Okay, fine. Yeah.
Right. It's going to take on a different name. Yeah. I just
Yeah.
quickly Googled it, and it looks like companies like Google, Facebook, and Atlassian have implemented no meeting days, which I've heard of course.
Yeah, okay, that's another story.
That's
One day
different.
a week.
One day a week.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, how can I get one of those? Meeting cleanup days. GitLab has annual meeting cleanup days to reset which recurring meetings are actually necessary. Focus Fridays. Slack has Focus Fridays. I love Google's new AI feature where it just kind of grabs everything from the internet and tells you the key things, because I just Googled it so quickly. And then Shopify, this was the company I was thinking of. Shopify canceled most meetings entirely, removing nearly 10,000 events from employee calendars. The company also created a bot to alert employees when they try to schedule a meeting on Wednesdays, which I guess is intentionally. So that actually, it sounds like they said all meetings are trash, delete them all. And then it's figure out which ones really makes sense.
It's another, burn everything down and then rebuild whatever is
right,
needed.
Regrow.
Oh, we need a toilet. Okay, we need to build a toilet. Okay, fine.
Right, exactly. But all of this to say, it makes me think about, I realize I might be jumping ahead here, what you said around what you're seeing with increased demand and pressure on HR professionals. Because when we think about this all in the lens of people are feeling lonely, people are craving social interaction, they need more social moments, that what I've just shared that Harvard Business Review has put out saying that there needs to be a programmatic intentionality to this, someone's got to plan those things. So that pressure does fall generally, usually on us, on HR.
Yeah, we have to go back to loneliness. We have a couple of more things to talk about that. Really, we just need to kind of really scratch the surface. There's more to talk about that, but we can go into this one about HR and the demands. Since I travel the world and giving speeches and training people from different places, I see in many areas increased expectation and demand on HR from the DE&I perspective, of course, from a leadership development perspective, but also from other type of areas where you have, like for instance, in Southeast Asia, more than half of all the executives expect HR to drive the digital culture in the company. So again, they are the drivers. We talked about this the last time, about HR not owning everything, but they are the drivers of many things, and this is one of those things. And what I can see when it comes to, for instance, social well-being, I can absolutely see HR as a driver again, and that there is a demand of somebody helping us out here of how can we handle it so that we have people who come to their workplaces and feel good, feel appreciated, feel seen, being part of the village or part of the tribe. Because if they don't, they will feel super stressed out, and all of a sudden you will have tons of problems, mental health, physical health problems as well. It's even so that lonely people die sooner than other people. So it's a life expectancy thing to feel that you have a sense of connection with other people and so on, that you have somebody to call. If something happens, do you have somebody to call? Do you have somebody to go to? So there is something to be said on this. At the same time, I see, especially when you have a downturn or an uncertain economy, that we give HR less mandate to do things. And for me, the solution to this, as I have seen at least, is that HR need to be better at presenting business cases. Showing the rest of the execs with whatever budget they have that this makes perfect business sense. This makes perfect business sense. Because if we only say we need people to feel better, then this could be, this typical HR fluffy people thing. It's not. It's hard numbers behind it. So if we can be better at presenting why we should get away from something that is bad and towards something that is good, and we can present numbers to it as well. How much does it increase employee engagement? How much does it decrease absenteeism? How many less people will search for a new job because they don't feel that they are in a good place, because they feel isolated or alone or lonely? All of those things we can put numbers to. And it might be, social science is not natural science, so it might not be exactly 28% or 29%, but it's a huge number that we need to take seriously. But if we don't present those numbers in a good way, then chances are we won't get the opportunity to develop, for instance, our teams and our leaders and so on. So I see that the requirements are there. Let's see if we can help the rest of the decision makers by presenting good cases for it, just like you have to do in other type of sales situations, or convincing people on building up starting a new plant somewhere, or starting a new product line or whatever. It's the same here.
Yeah,
we could do much more.
I totally agree. This is something that tends to be a recurring theme, I would say, on my podcast, whether it's advice from me or from other guests, that the better you are when, at least within HR, but especially in business in general, the better you are at making a business case and using hard and fast numbers that are factual and data points, the easier it's going to be for you to influence change. I mean, at the end of the day, there are still, unfortunately, a lot of people who are in business who believe that HR serves as a cost center to the company and doesn't necessarily drive positive outcomes or business results directly. And that's obviously, in my perspective, and I think yours too, fundamentally untrue. And the more we become accustomed to strengthening our business acumen, the easier that's going to be to break down in terms of the stigma. And what you said around absenteeism, this is 100% true. Going back to this topic on loneliness specifically, and as you mentioned, there is still a lot to talk about, so we'll go back. The Surgeon General in the US and the World Health Organization have specifically said to people that loneliness at work and a lack of social interaction has a cost on people's health, as you've also shared. So there's so much data behind this topic. There's so much, there are so many facts that people in HR, outside of HR, can leverage to really understand the impact that can affect, the impact that these, that loneliness can have on someone, and the effect and the positive impact that can be felt when companies focus on maybe a more programmatic or intentional approach to the social interaction. So with that, let's go back to loneliness. I know there are a couple other things that you want to still get into, so maybe we talk further on the social well-being aspect of things, because I know this is a bit of your bread and butter these days.
Well, I mean, as you know, that I'm this human communication nerd at my core, but then that has to lead somewhere. Communication in itself is nothing, but the effect of it is everything. And this is what we're talking about. How do we meet, greet, and treat each other, so to say? So a couple of examples that I found around the world. In Japan last year, 40,000 people died without anyone knowing it. 4,000 of them, it took a month for anyone to know it. So we're not talking about employees now. We're talking about private citizens, older citizens, obviously, a lot of them. It's devastating to hear that. I know in South Korea, for instance, they see this as such a serious issue that they are now investing more than 3 billion, I think, to make sure that nobody should feel lonely in this country. You know what? I don't know if that's billion, because I'm also translating it to other currencies and so on. Sure. Lots and lots of money. I don't know how many US dollars we're talking about here, but it was a huge number. I read about it recently, and they will do everything they can so that no one in this country will feel lonely. And I know that I think I already mentioned it in one of your podcasts, but we talked about it as well. In Arizona, not too long ago, this 60-year-old woman died in her office, and 4 days. It took 4 days before anyone noticed it. And I'm wondering, where are her colleagues, her boss? What is the culture going on right now? And I know that they blamed it on the fact that, well, she was sitting in a place where you had flexible work. So, well, still, again, that's not an excuse.
Right.
That's a reason, perhaps, why you didn't solve it, or why didn't you talk to her? I mean, it just upsets me that could happen.
I agree.
I know I live in Sweden, for instance, and we have the highest number of single households in the world as well. So So when I looked at this across the world, and the World Health Organization is recognizing loneliness as an epidemic right now. It's huge, and it costs perhaps trillions of dollars in the world to just handle it. So there's a personal tragedy going on, of course, because it's really tough to not feel part of the village, of the tribe.
Yeah.
That's very stressful. That puts a strain on your mental health and your physical health. That's why I said people die even before they had to because of this. There's the heart disease, dementia, all sorts of things happen when you are too stressed for too long. And that's actually what it is about. You get stressed for too long. So that's why we need to talk about this and make sure that we create an environment, let's say, talk about work again now, an environment where people can actually feel that they are part of something.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And that poor woman, I think she worked for Wells Fargo, the woman in Arizona that you're referring to.
She did. Yeah. That's
right?
what they said in the article. Yeah.
Yeah. I talked about that also on a recent podcast. And I know, as you mentioned, we talked about it kind of offline. My first thought, my second thought, I should say, my first thought was, where the heck are her colleagues? Just as you said. My second,
like said, yeah.
Right. My second thought was, she has no one in her life that she's speaking to on a regular basis that said, I haven't heard from her in 24 hours. Is everything okay? And that is a really, really sad thought. Like I try to put myself in her situation when I first read that article, which is a difficult thing to do because it's just a sad scenario all the way around. Someone has died, and someone has died alone. And I was like, okay, I actually could not even fathom being missing, God forbid, for 24 hours, let alone 12, without someone wondering, where am I? Because of how deeply connected I am between my family and my friends and work. And when I put myself in her position, I was like, I can't imagine what her day to day was like, being so isolated. And, sometimes I don't want to presume that people don't like isolation. Sometimes there are certainly people maybe who prefer life that way. Maybe
yeah, but then it's voluntary, Tracy. That's a different story.
Right. That's true. It's voluntary. But in this case, she's an employee who actively scanned in to get into an office, went to her desk, and there must have been employees there. I know it was over a weekend, but no one, how is it possible that no one noticed that she was there and no one noticed that she was missing until 4 days later? I mean, it's really a major tragedy. And I think it's really comforting to know that there are countries like South Korea that are investing so much money and so many resources to ensuring that something like this doesn't happen to one of their citizens. It's really tragic.
Yeah, and of course it could still happen, and we all know that. But what I believe, without knowing this particular person, is that we seem to have more acquaintances, shallow relationships, and not perhaps that many deep relationships. If you look at one of the longest ever studies, 80 years, started in Boston, about what happiness is really about, it boiled down to one thing: good relations. That's it. So if you have a situation, and I can see easily how social media makes you think that you, to some extent, are part of something, but on the other hand, you're more or less standing outside and looking in. So you're standing outside, looking in through the window and see other people who seem to have such a good time. So while thinking that you are part of, you're still on the outside. So you still don't feel perhaps as much part of the tribe. So trying to replace real relationships with some sort of social media is just a pale copy. It will never be the same quality of that one. And I suppose I can go for 4 days without, saying anything, and people will not think about it, even though I do have good friends. So I don't know, but it was so tragic. So that was one of those reasons why I started to look into this even more, since I do a lot of keynotes on employee engagements and so on. And this is typically so. If you feel lonely like that, you are 7 times less likely to be engaged, 5 times more likely to be homesick, for instance, and 2 times more likely to search for a new job where you can perhaps find a new meaning, a new people around you.
Yeah, and emphasis on your point that some, there's a difference between voluntary versus involuntary. And when we think about, when we think about the involuntary loneliness, like I think I was speaking with someone at work recently who is a recent graduate, and she did not say that she was lonely. However, she said that she was really craving in-person interaction. And, we're a remote company. And when I hear that, I'm like, okay, how do we make this something that can happen organically? And how do we also take a programmatic approach to this? And, to your point on the engagement side of things, and, people potentially leaving as a result of not having the connections and the relationships and the lack of loneliness, or like that feeling of social well-being. There's a, I don't know really how to say this, but there's kind of a stake for everyone in the business on this. And one of the things that you said before was kind of around like the leadership expectation and how we support leaders to better solve some of these problems and identify what their employees need and create moments for the social aspects of being a part of a team. And one of the things that the Harvard Business Review article talks about is that managers have to support these social moments in order for loneliness to not take place in the workplace. I think the statistic was that managers who support, I'm going to look it up really quickly as I say this, but managers who support, yes, I see it, their relationships, employees' relationships with others at work, that only 18% of the highly lonely employees said that their managers are actually supporting them. So meaning 18% of these employees who are saying that they're extremely lonely feel the support of their manager saying, go out, have those social moments, or even with the manager creating social moments during meetings, compared to 77% of people who weren't lonely at work. So in another way of saying this, 77% of people who are not lonely at work are getting the support from their manager to have those social interactions. And then the article continues on by saying that, sometimes when you even just take the first few moments of a meeting to create a social moment, whether it's how was your weekend? How are the dogs doing? What are your kids up to? Do you have anything fun planned for the holidays coming up? That goes a very long way because it's an intentional moment that is not just solely focused on work. So, again, thinking about this voluntary versus involuntary and where the leaders come in, there's a lot of ownership on them. And then kind of coming back to HR's responsibility, as much as we drive things, we also have to help leaders to understand their impact, positive and negative, on the workplace.
And therein lies one of the keys. And I'm not saying that leaders cannot be, or managers cannot be lonely too. Of course they can. Right. It's actually pretty lonely at the top because you're not part of the gang like right. the other ones are. But absolutely, this is so important that we give them the opportunity to help out. For me, the one of the manager's biggest role is to remove obstacles. Mm-hmm. And if this is an obstacle, then make sure you remove it. If you only focus on results and not on relationships, then you will have more of a transactional type of communication instead of a relational communication. So if it's all about transaction, well, then it's just about outcome. And you don't care about people. And care is one of my favorite words in the English dictionary nowadays. Care, just care. Care for your people, care for your vision, mission, care for the whole planet. So if you don't care, well, then you will have a workforce that feels that, just like you said. And if you then have people who are a bit vulnerable because of circumstances that make them perhaps not have that many friends or something like that, then you're not doing yourself a favor, because in the long run you will run down this department because people will burn out or leave or just be miserable. Totally. So again, removing obstacles is a smart way of getting the outcome you want. And one of those things is to care for your people, of course, and make sure that you help all of them to to meet each other, to help each other out, and so on. And there's a lot of things you can do, very concrete things. You can use buddy systems, mentor systems, ERG. Is that a common acronym?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah, okay, good,
Yep.
good. Which happens often in bigger companies. Of course, larger companies have a possibility to have all sorts of hobby groups going on, and there's so much you can do to help out, to make them feel that they are part of something.
Yeah.
Volunteer work is fantastic. If you start giving, then you don't focus on yourself. This is one of those things. You focus on something else or someone else, which means you cannot focus on yourself. And all of a sudden, you will actually become happier because of it. 23% more happy and motivated if you start giving in those type of voluntary situations. You decrease the risk of dying by 44%, according to one study. So there's a win-win of showing empathy and compassion and helping each other out.
It really is a win-win. And actually, this is a quote that I know you find to be extremely impactful on your life. I think you actually said it's your favorite quote, and it's one of mine too. And it's a quote by Winston Churchill, which is, "We make a living by what we get, and we make a life by what we give." There is a huge, huge, huge benefit when we do for others. And to your point with volunteerism or, altruism, even donating time, money, however, someone can find the means to do so. There have been so many studies on what that does for someone. And there is also an intentionality around creating community through volunteerism too, because naturally when someone is spending time doing for someone else, like giving to someone else, you meet other like-minded people, and therein lies a community that maybe once did not exist for someone. And it is obviously sometimes outside of work, but workplaces also have the opportunity to bring these, various people together and for one purpose outside of whatever their day-to-day job looks like, to give back to others. There's so much benefit to that. We could probably talk about that on another episode.
That could be a separate episode in itself, but it is important. You can do even more things. One of the things that I like when you have an organization is to do group work. All of a sudden you're 3 or 4 people working together on a certain topic and then presenting it perhaps at the next meeting or something like that. It's excellent. It's a really good way to do it. You can do it also virtually, of course. Mm-hmm. If you have a distributed team, you tell Sarah and you tell Jonas and you tell Traci and you tell Antoni, hey, go together, do this, and then come back. And then we can, have our own team meetings or whatever, and then back into that feeling of, let's do it together. It's all of a sudden I'm not that lonely anymore, because we have a common purpose and we have a common goal and we have, we work together and so on. So there are things you can do, of course, and simple things like saying good morning in the morning instead of looking down in your phone, spending that extra 2 minutes with somebody instead of rushing away because you're stressed all the time. Saying to the newcomer, hey, do you want to join us for lunch? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's simple, small things can make a huge difference, because all of a sudden they are seen. Oh, okay, you see me. I'm here, part of this. Thank you.
Right. That the simplicity in what you've mentioned you could have written this article on HBR. That is another thing that they underline, that, the way forward does not have to be so complicated. It doesn't have to be something that costs trillions of dollars. Like, these are simple things that people are already doing in their own lives, potentially those who are more connected maybe than others, who can just extend an olive branch or create just a little bit more intentionality and inclusivity around how they are doing these things. And certainly, again, coming back to maybe some increased demand and pressure on HR, the ownership is all around. We have a responsibility in HR to help and influence others to see their responsibilities in all of these, areas of business and people's lives. And this, obviously, the line is blurred, right? Loneliness doesn't stop after 5 p.m. If someone feels lonely at work, chances are they're probably feeling lonely outside of work too. And they're looking for some community, as you mentioned, some sense of communal purpose. And there's just a lot of
simple opportunity out there that doesn't even require any money at all, just a little bit more focus and intentionality.
Yeah, and Traci, that I work with organizations. It's about leadership, it's about HR, it's about employee engagement, all of those things. But let me be personal for a short while here, and give that perhaps final tips from my side. Call your mom, call your grandpa. It's you don't know how much time you still have with them. I saw this video that really touched me to the core. Let's say that you're, like in my case, my dad is turning 84 years old. He won't live that many more years. And I meet him perhaps 4 times per year. That means that I might only have 10 more times with him. It's not like 3 years, it's 10 times. And all of a sudden it becomes very real. So I'm trying to call him, like, if not every day, at least every other day. And it's a 90-second call. It's just, hey, how you doing? What's going on? All right, let's talk to you soon. And I will not regret those 90 seconds that I spend every day. So pick up that phone and just call.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, when you put it that way, right? I'm sure that there are listeners who either are, realizing, oh, wow, Antoni is right. I need to pick up the phone. I'll never regret that time spent. There might also be listeners who are like, if only I had 90 more seconds with someone that's already gone, right? So there's so much to that. And I really appreciate you sharing that personal anecdote. And again, it could be as simple as that, picking up the phone and calling someone and taking it off of a text message, taking it off of a Slack, right? And taking that extra effort.
Or just having that thought and then do nothing about it.
Right. Yeah, that's also an option, I suppose. And with that, Antoni, I know I can't even believe we spent almost 40 minutes now talking about something so deeply important and impactful. But are there any other words of wisdom that you'd like to impart on the listeners? And also, where can everyone connect with you to learn more and hopefully gain some additional wisdom?
Well, I see us right now at the crossroads where some organizations choose to trust people, care for people, and I see them as the winner. And I also see the other ones who says, I cannot stand this uncertainty anymore, so I'm going to control them much more. I'm going to micromanage, I'm going to control them, I'm not going to trust them anymore. Please don't go that route. That's going to be my last call to action. Go for the care-centric, empathy-driven communication and engagement. That's going to be much better. Sustainably better as well. You find me, if you can spell my name, you will find me. I'm the only one in the world with that name. So you find me on AntoniLacinai.com. You find me on LinkedIn, Antoni Lacinai. Even on Instagram, I have a small account there as well. So those are the main channels. And Antoni@Lacinai.com if you want to get in touch with me. And I would love to, be out there supporting more people and sharing my insights and hopefully my inspiration as well. So, whoever wants to get in touch with me, please do.
Yes, please do. I'll share all of those links in the show notes as well. And thank you again for coming back on the podcast. I'm sure this will not be the last time you're here gracing us with your wisdom and your tips and anecdotes. So thank you so much for walking us through a really, really, really important topic that I'm sure will continue to remain at the top of everyone's level of priority, I hope. So thank you so much. And for all the listeners, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and check out all of the links that Antoni just referenced in the show notes as well to connect with him further. Thank you so much, Antoni.
Thank you so much, Traci.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.